Welcome to the Millionaire Next Door podcast with Robert Curtis, CFP accredited investment fiduciary from Signature Estate and Investment Advisors. In this podcast, we help successful wealth accumulators like you looking to transition to a work-optional lifestyle by helping you build strategies for growing and maintaining your wealth. Robert draws from years of experience and fiduciary responsibility and interviews guest experts to help you build reliable strategies to grow and maintain your wealth. Now, on to the show.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome so much to the Millionaire Next Door podcast. We're delighted that you're here and tuned in, and thank you so much for being part of our community. Today, I have a terrific guest, Matt Halloran. He's the co-founder of ProudMouth. That's actually the company that produces this podcast. But Matt reached out to me. He's just released a new book focused on the importance of listening. That is such a key seminal skill. It's a cornerstone of my practice. I think the world would be much better if people were better at listening. So I jumped at the opportunity. Delighted to have you, Matt. Please introduce yourself and welcome to the show.
Well, listen, I'm utterly grateful for the opportunity to come talk to people about listening. And it's the long and the short of it is this. Everybody has two ears, but nobody seems to be really focusing on teaching people how to listen. And it's actually a muscle that you have to continue to exercise and challenge and, try to get better at it. And so I decided I was going to write a book. And so I did.
That's really cool. I always just felt some people were intuitively good at it and others maybe weren't, but you're saying it's an ongoing practice, something that you really train like a muscle, like going to the gym. That's really, so that is super interesting. Keep going. You mentioned in our sort of prep for this, and I don't know if this is a good way to start, there's sort of an epidemic of loneliness out there. Yeah. I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit. Plus, I want to hear about training this skill, muscle, exercise, practice. Yeah, go for it.
So I know that you're into being physically healthy and exercise and all of those sorts of things. And as you know, Robert, there are people who are predisposed to being better at certain athletic events. Music, you were just talking about before we started recording that you went to a concert this weekend, right? There are people who are really good at that. And so there are people who are intuitively, inherently better listeners, but everybody can learn how to do it better. So the philosophical premise here is that we really do have an epidemic of loneliness in the world today. Everybody is screaming into the void, hoping that somebody's going to show that they're listening. But very few people are teaching people how to show they're listening. We have something called active listening, which is what everybody talks about. It's the nodding and saying, but that's very you focused, making you feel you're listening. That isn't actually making somebody else feel like they're listening. So I take listening and I break it down into 7 different components and with specific exercises. And the easiest one, since we don't have, 10 hours to go through all of this stuff, Robert, is learning how to listen, not listen to respond. And as you know, running a podcast, I interview people and have really for many, many, many years. When I go into a conversation, not expecting to have the focus being on me, but having the entire focus being on the person who is chatting, that's where everything fundamentally changes. And one of my favorite things to talk about is, let's say you say something, or let's say I say something to you in answering this question, and I'm maybe 30 seconds into it, and you're like, oh my God, that was so smart. I can't wait to talk to him about that. You just missed the whole rest of everything that I said because you're listening to respond. You're not listening to listen. And that was really the epidemic of loneliness. And what I just kept noticing was people I was talking to were only trying to listen so that they could talk again. When you take that so you can talk again out of the equation and exercise the muscle of really just pure listening, what I call engaged listening, that changes everything.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And I think you're right. You're right there. I mean, I always strive with clients to be interested rather than interesting. Just a thought I have in mind, but I could certainly work at that skill. I think a lot of folks keep going. Why did you, I think you've already kind of answered it, why you wrote the book, but do you want to
Yeah.
explore that a little bit? Yep.
Well, so I don't have necessarily the straightest path to me being the co-founder of ProudMouth, but it's interesting because everything started sort of kind of culminated into where I am in my life at 52 years old today. So I was a therapist, right? And before I was a therapist, I worked at a place called Boys Town where we lived with at-risk teenage boys and helped them learn life skills. And what I had found was the quickest way for me to build trust and deepen a relationship with somebody is to just literally shut up. And when I was a therapist, it was the same thing. And as a therapist in graduate school, you learn how to listen. Actually, there are courses on listening, but it was all very focused on active listening. And I started deconstructing what active listening was and realized it's not empty listening, but it's not entirely full listening. And then I've interviewed about 3,000 people, Robert. So in all of the shows that I've done, I've done over 1,000 podcasts myself, whether I'm hosting them or being a guest on somebody's show. There was this one particular pivot point, the tipping point, as Gladwell would say, which was I was interviewing this guy, and he just kept saying the same thing over and over again. It's actually a story in my book. And it was driving me crazy. It was like he just was stuck on this specific talking point because he was a real hardcore sales guy and he was just trying to drive it home. And then I noticed, Robert, that there was a little change in his pace, pentameter, cadence, and volume, just like micro change. And I was like, whoa, there's something going on there. So I stopped him. I interrupted his pattern. And I said, whoa, that sounded different than the first time I heard you say that. There's something there. What am I missing? And dude, everything, he just opened up and he became like this, because this was his armor, right? And a lot of us have this, what's your unique value proposition? What do you do for a living? We all have this armor. And once you can break down that armor and really show people that you're interested in hearing what's behind that wall, armor, whatever you want to call it, man, that fundamentally changes absolutely everything. And so about 2-3 weeks later, I'm interviewing another guy, and I had realized at the end that I had said 3 sentences in the entire 30-minute episode. And we get done, and this guy goes, Matt, that was the best podcast I've ever been on in my whole life. And I was like, what are you talking about, man? He's like, dude, I felt like you were listening, and man, I got to say all the things that I wanted to say, and I just sat back, and I was like, man, I didn't say anything on that show at all. I was like, wait a second, I'm onto something here. And then I just did what I do, which is I get into periods of reflection and meditation and focus, and just all of these things started popping up, Robert. And then that culminated into the book.
Wow, that's so interesting. And really, because you were listening so close, you could sense these inner little nuances, and that opened it all up. That is really a great telling story. So I guess that is quite a transition, by the way, too, as a therapist dealing with at-risk youth. That really is about listening to their stories, I would think, and building that trust. Talk about your personal mission, I guess, on this whole journey or in writing the book. And you must have learned an enormous amount.
Well, I learned that I still got a long way to go, brother. That's an important thing that I constantly have to remind myself that, yes, I did write this book. I have been practicing this for many, many years. But so I think one of the biggest issues is, and I'll kind of go back to the whole loneliness component. We all have these facades, billboards on social media, professionally, personally, the car you drive, clothes you wear, the house you live in, the zip code that you're from, what you do for a living. And then, we also have the next level of that, which again is this social media presence. And it's really amazing when, and I do this on social specifically, especially when somebody seems very angry and are replying in a very angry manner to something that was rather benign or whatever, I will literally type, I hear you. And I get a connection request almost immediately, and or people will start responding with just that phrase. I think a lot of people think that listening is a in-person sport, right? Where you're hanging out with somebody and you're doing that. But all of the stuff that I talk about, all of the exercises, all of those things are wildly applicable on digital too. So I've 20 some odd year old kids. They have their in real life friends and then their online friends, right? And that was a big distinction for my wife and I to really get comfortable with, because they value their IRL friends as much in real life as they do with their online friends, their digital friends. And like my son Wesley was talking about, he's got this friend of his in Ireland that he talks to every day. And I'm like, are you ever going to see him in person? He's like, why? It's like, first off, you get to go to Ireland, dude. You're totally short-sighted on this, man. Ireland's pretty freaking
Right.
cool. So learning these skills in the digital world too is very, very important, especially because that's where a lot of the toxicity is. And that's where a lot of the loneliness really appears, Robert, is, people who are those keyboard warriors who are screaming at you online. They just want to know somebody heard them. I don't agree with them 98% of the time. I just want them to know that somebody's actually listening. And I really do believe that we can fundamentally change the world by just showing that little bit of grace, that little bit of compassion, and showing them that they're listening.
Well, to borrow your phrase, I mean, I hear you 100%. I really do think the world would be much better if we would just listen to one another. The younger, I have 20-something year old kids too, so it's such a different world how they view it. And I'm just trying to understand it and get my head around it. But something really has fundamentally changed. I grew up in a home where we just discussed everything, and then we'd argue and all that. It was very loving, but we just hash it all out and you could hear different sides of view. Now it doesn't seem like, I don't know if people they don't do that anymore. Everything's confrontational. And there's no ability to just listen, have the conversation, and move on. People used to disagree all the time. There's nothing new about that. But now it's a giant wall. I don't know how we work ourselves around that, but it feels like that's building. But
it is building. But
yeah.
I really agree with you on that. And again, not trying to hypersimplify this or oversimplify it. It's what you were taught how to do was to listen critically. You were taught to go ahead and have these discussions, not take these things as personal attacks, because that's where you have to be able to remove your own personal ego. See, we're going a little bit deeper here, brother. So I hope you're okay with that. You have to remove your own personal ego to truly listen. And I think because we have such that billboard world, that social media presence, that I am different from you because of whatever identifying factors, especially with the Gen Z and millennial generations, where Gen X, we just buck to the whole system, right? I just think it's incredibly important for us to realize that once you remove yourself, you throw those things away. And in fact, I call it engaged listening for a reason. And I call it engaged listening because it's based off of this. Actually, it's a Buddhist monk. He was very, very famous. His name was Thich Nhat Hanh. He ran something called Plum Village in France, and it was a Nobel Peace Prize nominee quite a while ago for what he did in Vietnam. But one of the epiphanies that he had was all of these Buddhists are standing up on mountains and getting enlightened, and they don't ever tell anybody what happened, right? And he's like, no, we should be engaging people with Buddhism, not like evangelicalizing. That's not what he's talking about, but just going ahead and walking in the path. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do with listening here. Is listening should be an engaged process. Listening should be an interactive process. It is not passive. It is active. It is meant to be engaged. And going back to what you had said earlier, it's all about feeling engaged, right? When you can show somebody that you're engaged, Bob's your uncle, man, and that changes the world.
That's great. Yeah. And then it's a bit of work too. It's a work to be engaged. So that takes effort, I suppose. But
it does.
Yeah. On sides, you mentioned we were talking ahead of time, there's 5 types of communicators. Is that something you want to touch on? Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things I was trying to find a really quick hack so that people could identify very quickly who they were talking to, because dude, there's some people who just don't want to have real conversations, and that's fine. So that would actually be, the skydivers specifically. And so you've got the skydivers, you got the hang gliders, you got the water skiers, snorkelers, and then you got the scuba divers. So those are my 5 different types of communicators. Skydivers are, man, when any modicum of emotion, depth, man, they pull that ripcord, bam, they're gone. They're out of the way. Right. hang gliders are very interesting. I think more people are hang gliders than we would expect. So hang gliders are those people who will come around and, you'll say, what's up? How are you doing? What are you doing? Or, the simple colloquial questions that we have. But then if you actually show that you're listening, what'll end up happening is they're going to leave, but then they're going to circle back around and they're gonna be like, hey, Robert, I noticed that you actually gave a crap about the fact that you said I wasn't doing great. And so they circle back around. Now, they still don't like to go very deep. They still like to stay high level, but they're very, very receptive to a lot of the skills that I teach in the book. Then the third one is water skiers. There are a lot of people who are water skiers. I don't know if you've ever water skied. I live in Michigan. There's lots of lakes here, dude. You get behind a boat, you're holding on, dude, because when you fall, it doesn't feel great. And a lot of times you go under and you get water in your nose and all of that sort of stuff. But that's what most people are doing in conversations. They're just holding on for dear life because they're afraid that if they show any sort of weakness or they let go of the rope and allow the conversation to happen, that they're going to go ahead and get hurt. And then you've got the snorkelers. Now, this is what I think all of your listeners need to strive towards. And the snorkelers are those people who are very, very comfortable in the water, in the world of conversation and communication and listening. And what they'll do is they're looking at all the pretty stuff, right? They're looking at the fish and the coral and this, all the cool stuff that's swimming around them. And if they want to go deep, they can take a deep breath and they can go underwater, right? Snorkeling. But they only stay down for a little bit because, really great snorkelers can hold their breath for maybe 3 minutes, right? Most people can hold their breath for like a minute, minute and a half. So they kind of ride, they come up and down, right? So they're very comfortable people to talk with because they also realize that if they are in the depths with you, but you need to come up for air, they're going to come up for air too. So this is what I think most people need to strive towards, is really to become a snorkeler. But then you've got the scuba divers or the deep sea divers. And these are people, man, you ask them how they're doing. Man, they're 30 leagues below the sea, right? I mean, they're ready to talk about absolutely everything. They have no fear of the depth of conversation. And they are a lot of fun to be around. But you need to realize that they have all the equipment, right? So they have the diving gear, they've had the training. These are the people who most of us have one or two of them in our lives. But the reason I came up with these hacks is because each of those levels of communication or types of communicators will answer your questions in different ways. And you need to know what sort of listening technique that really works the best with all of them. So it was just a fun little hack that I talk about, that I just try to make it easier so people could just say, oh, yep, this person's a skydiver. They're not interested in really talking about anything. And when you go in with the understanding, then hopefully you're not going to be upset, because just because a person is a skydiver today, Robert, doesn't mean that they're not going to be a snorkeler tomorrow.
Right. Oh, that is such I've actually participated in a number of those sports and have different comfort levels with some, and some just freak me out. So I'm going to have to re-listen to this from the perspective of a listening, but some of it's just being out of a comfort zone. And like you're saying, these scuba divers, they've trained, they're ready, their comfort zone is huge. And I am a huge fan of trying to get out of my comfort zone on a regular basis, or do uncomfortable things. And a lot of people avoid that, I know, but I find when you get in the practice of that, then it makes the really difficult things often easier. But that's a learned practice as well. Tell me about holding space. That's a term you brought up, but that sounds fascinating. What does that mean?
Well, so I think that holding space, first off, the first step in engaged listening is listening to listen, not listening to respond. And then the second is being comfortable in the space. I studied with this guy after I had left being a therapist and came into financial services, the world that you and I both live in today. And it was in Estes Park, Colorado. It was basically a 5-day training on listening. We have to really get uncomfortable with comfortable with the discomfort of holding space. One of the greatest things that you can do is when somebody stops talking, our immediate response is to fill the space. What I'm asking everybody to do is to hold the space. And there's a very specific exercise that you can do to practice this, to go ahead and exercise this muscle, get more comfortable in this, what most people find uncomfortable silence. And the idea is very simple. You get done talking. The person who is, you're communicating finishes their sentence. And what you're going to do is you're going to just take a very, very slow breath through your nose, and you're going to go ahead and exhale, not like you're not going to be a weirdo about it, right? You're just going to take a nice deep breath through your nose and exhale through your mouth. And usually that cycle for most people, if you take a good belly breath, takes about 5 seconds. I call this the dramatic pause. If you do this at the end of every bit of conversation that you're having with somebody, when they finish, you're going to be unbelievably surprised at how quickly the level of depth and the relationship and trusts accelerates really fast. Because what you're doing is you're giving them permission to understand, comprehend, file what they just said in order for them to continue and go a little bit deeper. I also think it's important for you to visualize. So visualization is another huge component of engaged listening, but visualizing that space being comfortable, because if I go into a conversation with you, Robert, and I already am very comfortable in the silence, I'm already very comfortable in the space and have very comfortable with wherever we're going to go with the conversation, you're going to match me, dude. There's mirroring and matching. It's one of the greatest psychological neurolinguistic programming techniques that have ever been created. And you're going to match me, I'm going to match you. And then all of a sudden, and you felt this, dude, and so have your listeners, you ever just feel like you're totally in sync with somebody and you're like, wow, why did that go so well? Part of it is because you guys met each other at the same place. And I try to teach how you find that place so that you can hold that space with just about anybody you're talking to. Because when you hold that space, again, everything fundamentally changes. It gives people the time to process. And it also shows a lot of respect that you're being thoughtful in your response. If I just answer your question immediately after you get done talking, or I'm jumping on it before you're even done, which that happens a lot too, dude, is everybody just wants to talk. I really do think that that's a way that we can make real connection.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You're mentioning the breath work too. I spend a lot of time in that space with athletics. There's something called a physiological sigh. Have you ever heard of this thing? So it's actually, from what I understand, it's one of the quickest, most effective ways to reset the whole nervous system. But you do breathe in, like a deep breath, nasal breath in. Then you kind of catch a little bit more air, like breathing in a little bit more, and you let it out through your mouth. It can totally reset. I've heard guys like Andrew Huberman discuss it. It's pretty fascinating, but we're all going to find ourselves in little uncomfortable spots throughout the day, or real uncomfortable spots. Sometimes it's just in traffic. Some guy rather than honking and freaking out, try this. But you made me think of it within the context of a conversation. If you practice it, you can learn how to do it, on the phone and stuff. So you're not deep breathing into the phone, which is defined as creepy.
Yeah.
You mentioned listening to listen. Walk us through that real quick,
Well, again, so listening to listen is just being in full acceptance of the complete thought that's coming out of the person who you're communicating with. When you attach yourself to any component of what's being said, you miss. From that point on, you're not thinking, you're not listening anymore. And sometimes, dude, it can happen early. Somebody can be talking to you and they say something a minute into the conversation and you're like, oh my God, I want to talk. This is a point of connection, right? I just want to have that, that relationship that I want to build. But they keep talking for another 3 minutes. You lost that whole 3 minutes. They could have said 100 other things, Robert, that were just like the coolest things you've ever heard in your life, but you weren't listening. This is the hardest thing. Conceptually, it's very simple, but to execute, it's very, very difficult. And so this is why there are exercises after each aspect of the listening in the book. There's an exercise, a way to practice, because I think that that's what I found was really missing, even in graduate school as a therapist. I mean, we weren't really taught how to practice this. We were just taught the concepts of listening. And so I really wanted to dive in and hopefully help people be able to say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and take this exercise and I'm going to practice it today. And some of us, and I know you do a lot of physical challenges. There are certain exercises you like more than others, right? And so you generally lean into those because, you really like those. It's the same thing in the book. Anything that is a skill you have to practice. And one of the greatest ways to learn how to listen is to listen to the subtext. There's certain different things that you can listen to in a conversation: pace, pentameter, volume, and inflection. So those are the four big ones, right? And if you're listening to pace, if somebody changes their pace, they're either trying to catch up or they're trying to bring it to your attention. In fact, all of these are like, are you paying attention? Are you paying attention? Are you paying attention? Same thing with volume. And Robert, this, man. Somebody gets louder, they're probably excited about it. Maybe they're getting quieter. They're either running out of breath, or maybe it's something that's a little bit more sensitive that they're trying to shield around. But these are things that happen in conversation all the time. And unless you can identify those quickly, the example that I gave earlier, there was a pace, pentameter, and intonation change in what that guy said. And dude, that opened it up for me, right? I realized he was saying something under what he was saying. And that's when people feel like you're actually listening, that's where listening to listen, that's where the whole foundation is. Paying attention to everything. Volume, again, intonation. Intonation is another huge one. If somebody's raising their voice or lowering their voice, or maybe it becomes very staccato for some reason, you need to be really trying to pay attention to that. And once you start actually listening to the words that they're saying, then you're not going to need to respond, because you got to process what the hell happened with them. So now you're on the journey together.
I love it. I love it. I love all this putting in the work, actually training it. You mentioned a 5-day training course. I mean, that's amazing. I think people would be really well served. But your book gives a framework for all these things, exercises, things that people can be working on if they're truly interested in becoming better at it. And it sounds like when you were doing the therapy or you were taking courses, but you never really found a great resource that taught people how to do this. So, you've created it, which is amazing. Wondering, maybe as we start to kind of wrap up, land the plane a little bit, if you maybe give the audience a way to, maybe we engage in one of these skills, give us a way to practice their skills, with one of your exercises.
Well, so yeah. So I'm going to do the one that I have gotten the most feedback on. That's the most fun, because the other exercises that I told you, they aren't really actually fun. They're freaking work, dude.
Let's do the fun
you're
one.
like, oh crap, dude, I got to do this again. All right. So here's my favoriteest one in the whole wide world. You're going to go out to a restaurant, coffee shop, or wherever, public, with a friend. Okay. And you're going to sit really close to each other. So generally facing in the same direction. Again, this is specific for a reason. And then what you're going to do is you're going to scan the room. And you are both going to pick somebody else in this room that's having a conversation. Now, you're not going to sit and stare at them, because that's creepy. And I'm not talking about adding a creepiness factor in any of this. But you're going to go ahead and agree that those are the people that you're going to eavesdrop on. Seriously. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I want this in a public place, because there's a lot of other noise going on and there's a lot of other distractions. And this is a way to hone and focus your listening and your attention. So that's why I want it in a public space. And I also want you to do it with somebody else so you can compare notes at the end. And you're going to ask yourself just a few questions, right? So number one, what's the relationship between these people, right? Number two, how is the conversation going? So these are pretty easy, right? Pretty light. And then the third one is who is in control of the conversation? Now, the third one's usually pretty easy because it's the person who's generally talking the most. And in the book, I dive into this just a little bit deeper, but those are the best three questions you have. And then when you get done, you do this exercise 5-10 minutes, maybe while you're drinking your coffee or, having your appetizer or whatever. Then you turn to your friend or your significant other that you went to the public place with, and you say, okay, well, what did you get? Right? My favorite one is, what do you think the relationship is? It could be a first date. Maybe they've been married for 25 years. Maybe they're brother and sister, but it's amazing. By listening, you can pick up on that super fast. And my favorite thing is when you don't agree. No, I don't think they've been together that long. Really? I think they've been together for a long time. And then By the way, this can make for one of the most delightful dates, one of the most delightful times with your friends and family to do this, because you're talking about something other than yourselves.
Yeah.
You're talking about a shared experience that you're putting yourself in together. And it's one of my favoriteest things in the whole wide world to do. So that your listeners can do that anywhere at any time, when you're on the subway, when you're on the train, when you're on a bus, when you're, having coffee, when you're at work, at lunch. I mean, there's all sorts of times to do this, but your goal is to singularly focus on one conversation of many, and then try to suss out those 3 points.
I love it. That sounds like so much fun. I'm gonna maybe get for my kids, try and go out and do that just for the and just that shared experience to see what you come up with, what are their perceptions. We were both listening to and watching the same thing. So, one of my catchphrases I've used in my practice and kind of underlines my process is there's an old Yogi Berra quote, and he says, "You can observe a lot just by watching." So that's one of you can observe a lot just by listening, I suppose. The same kind of thing. So this is amazing, Matt. I really appreciate you coming on, and I encourage folks. I'm very excited to get the book and read it and start to actually make this an active process of working on it and getting better at it and learning the nuances that have taken you a year to, assimilate, and you sharing that with folks. Do you want to kind of close out any closing thoughts and or also let us know the name of the book, where to get it, all that stuff in a sort of a wrap-up conclusion would be fantastic.
Yeah. So when I was 7 years old, my grandmother told me that I had 2 ears and one mouth, so I should listen twice as much as I talk. And really what she was just telling me to do is to shut up, because I talked too much as a kid. So that's the foundation of the title of the book. The book is called Shut the F Up and Listen. You can get it on really anywhere. Amazon, the audiobook, digital, paperback, hardcover, all of that is available there. And I just, to leave your audience with this one thing, showing somebody you're listening, no matter if you're in a relationship, if you're a salesperson, if you're a business owner, if you're in a leadership position, showing people you're listening, to actually listen to them and just make sure that they feel that they're heard, changes everything. And that's all you have to do. Didn't say it was easy, but it's all you have to do to fundamentally change all of the relationships in your life, is to just shut the F up and listen.
Wow. Well, I love it. I'd say get the book. I'm going to get it. We're as we record this, it's late December. This will probably be out in early January. Maybe think of it as a New Year's resolution. But yeah, I'm definitely into it. I'd love to find out what elements of a hang glider I am versus a scuba diver, a snorkeler, where I'm at. Get my head around that. But really appreciate you coming on and sharing. This sounds absolutely fascinating. Thanks for being here, and it's great to have you. This is a terrific message. I think will help a lot of folks, just like you said, in your marriage, with your loved ones, with your kids, with your clients, other people you interact with. Given the epidemic of loneliness, people need to be heard. We all need that. We need people who care. So thanks for doing that. I think it's a terrific gift. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, wonderful. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you for listening to the Millionaire Next Door podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available.
The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Signature Estate and Investment Advisors. Signature Estate and Investment Advisors, LLC, SEIA, is an SEC-registered investment advisor. However, such registration does not imply a certain level of skill or training, and no inference to the contrary should be made. Securities offered through Signature Estate Securities LLC, member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through SEIA LLC, 2121 Avenue of the Stars, Suite 1600, Los Angeles, California, 90067. Telephone number 310-712-2323.